My name is Rachel Bennett. I'm 34, and this is the story of the night I tried to impress my in-laws and instead exposed their darkest secret. It started with a simple dinner. My husband Daniel thought it would be a good idea. "Just cook for them, Rach," he said, his voice full of hope. "Once they taste your food, once they see you in our home, really making it a home, they'll come around." I wanted to believe him. I loved Daniel more than anything, but loving him meant being attached to his family. And the Bennetts were a world away from mine. They had old money, the kind that whispers instead of shouts, but it still makes you feel small. They lived in a sprawling mansion in the richest part of town, while I grew up in a 2-bedroom house where the floorboards creaked and the laughter was loud. For 5 years, they had made it clear that I didn't belong. This dinner was my last-ditch effort. I agreed to cook a meal in our small, cozy home, hoping that a taste of who I really was might finally be enough for them to accept me. I had no idea that by the end of the night, their perfect world would be in ashes, and I'd be the one holding the match. The weight of their judgment was a heavy coat I'd been forced to wear for 5 years. It wasn't one big thing, but 1,000 little cuts that left me bleeding on the inside. I remember the first time I met Daniel's mother, Evelyn. She held my hand with her fingertips, her manicured nails like tiny, perfect daggers. Her eyes scanned my simple dress, my department store shoes, and she gave a tight, thin smile. "Daniel has certainly found something different," she'd said. The word hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Different meant less. I knew it then, and I knew it every day after. Evelyn loved to talk about my education. She had a master's in art history from a prestigious university. I had a business degree from a state school I'd worked my way through. At family gatherings, she would steer the conversation toward art or literature, then turn to me and ask a question she knew I couldn't answer. "Rachel, darling, what are your thoughts on the pre-Raphaelite movement?" she'd ask, her voice syrupy sweet. I would just freeze, feeling my face grow hot. Daniel would try to jump in to save me, but the damage was always done. I was the uncultured, uneducated girl who wasn't good enough for her son. His father, Thomas, was quieter, but just as cruel. He was a powerful investment banker who valued status above all else. He would ask about my job. I was an office manager at a small marketing firm, with a dismissive wave of his hand. "So you handle the paperwork?" he'd sneer, making my hard work sound like a child's hobby. He never failed to mention the important people he'd had lunch with or the million-dollar deals he'd closed. He was showing me, in his cold and calculating way, that I brought nothing of value to the Bennett family name. I had no connections, no wealth, no status. I was a liability. Then there was Caroline, Daniel's younger sister. She was a carbon copy of her mother, but louder and more obvious. She lived off her parents' money, spending her days shopping and lunching with friends who were just like her. Caroline loved to brag. She'd flash her new designer handbag or talk endlessly about her latest trip to Europe. She'd look at my simple, comfortable home and say things like, "Oh, this is so cute. It must be nice to live so simply." She didn't mean it as a compliment. She meant it as an insult. She was telling me my life was small, insignificant, and that I would never understand hers. Daniel saw it, of course. He tried to defend me. He would argue with them, telling them to stop, to give me a chance. But they were his parents, his family. He loved them, and he hoped, just like I did, that one day they would see me for who I was. He didn't understand the depth of their disapproval. He thought it was just snobbery. I knew it was something deeper. They saw me as a stain on their perfect family portrait. Despite everything, I was determined. I loved Daniel, and I had built a life with him. This dinner, I told myself, was my chance to prove my worth. Not with money or status, but with something real, something from the heart. This dinner would be my final stand. The day of the dinner, my kitchen became my sanctuary. I decided to make a meal that was simple, classic, and full of warmth. It was the kind of food I grew up on, the kind of food that felt like a hug. I would make a roast chicken, seasoned with fresh rosemary from the little pot on my windowsill. I'd serve it with creamy mashed potatoes, a bright seasonal salad with a lemon vinaigrette, and for dessert, the one thing I knew I could make perfectly, my mother's apple pie. As I washed the potatoes, I could almost hear my mom's voice in the quiet kitchen. She passed away when I was in college, but her memory was as vivid as ever. "Food is love, Rachel," she used to say, her hands always busy, always creating something wonderful. It's more than just something to eat. It's memory. It's a way of showing people you care without having to say a word. Her apple pie was legendary in our family. The crust was flaky and buttery, the filling a perfect mix of sweet and tart apples with just the right amount of cinnamon. It was the taste of my childhood, of safety, of unconditional love. I poured all of my hope into that meal. I carefully chopped the vegetables, my knife making steady, rhythmic sounds against the cutting board. I rubbed butter and herbs under the skin of the chicken until it was perfect. I mashed the potatoes until they were smooth and creamy, adding a little too much butter, just the way Daniel liked it. Every step was deliberate, every ingredient chosen with care. This meal was my heart on a plate. It was my story. It was the story of a girl from a simple background who knew how to create comfort and warmth. As I rolled out the pie dough, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. What if it wasn't enough? What if they looked at my simple, heartfelt meal with the same disdain they looked at me? I pushed the thought away. I had to believe it would be different this time. I crimped the edges of the pie crust, making a pattern just like my mom used to. The pie was a piece of her, a piece of me. I slid it into the oven and watched through the glass as the crust began to turn a beautiful golden brown. The smell of cinnamon and baked apples filled our small house, a warm and comforting scent that fought back against the cold dread I felt. I looked around my kitchen at the beautiful meal I had prepared, and I took a deep breath. If this doesn't win them over, I whispered to myself, nothing will. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. The Bennetts were never late. I took one last look in the hall mirror, smoothing down my simple black dress. I felt a tremor in my hands and clasped them together to stop the shaking. Daniel opened the door, a wide, hopeful smile on his face. Mom, Dad, Caroline? Come on in. Evelyn swept in first, a cloud of expensive perfume trailing behind her. She was wearing a silk blouse and a string of pearls that probably cost more than my car. Her eyes did a quick, critical scan of our living room, from the comfortable but slightly worn sofa to the framed photos of my family on the bookshelf. She didn't say a word, but her expression said everything. It wasn't good enough. Rachel, dear, she said, offering me her cheek to kiss. It was cold as marble. Thomas followed, tall and imposing in a dark suit. He barely looked at me, his eyes already searching for something to criticize. Decent neighborhood, he grunted, as if it was a great surprise that we didn't live in a slum. He handed me a bottle of wine. I trust you have a proper corkscrew. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge. Then came Caroline, who looked around our home as though it were a strange exhibit at a museum. Oh, look, you have one of those IKEA bookshelves, she said, pointing. How quaint. She laughed a little, a high, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. I forced a smile, my cheeks aching from the effort. It's so good to see you all. Please, have a seat. Can I get you something to drink? My voice sounded strange to my own ears, a little too high, a little too bright. I was determined to stay calm, to be the perfect hostess. I would not let them get to me. Not tonight. Daniel, sensing my discomfort, put his arm around my waist and squeezed gently. Everything smells amazing, Rach, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. His parents just offered weak, polite smiles. The battle had begun, and I hadn't even served the first course. We sat down at the dinner table, which I had set with my best plates and a small vase of fresh flowers. For a few minutes, there was a strained, awkward silence, broken only by the clinking of silverware. I brought out the food, placing each dish on the table with a hopeful heart. The chicken was perfectly golden. The potatoes were steaming, and the salad looked fresh and colorful. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pride. Thomas carved the chicken with an air of great authority. He placed a small slice on his plate and took a bite. He chewed slowly, thoughtfully, as if he were judging a fine wine. It's fine, he finally muttered, turning his attention to the wine he'd brought. He swirled it in his glass, sniffed it, and took a sip. At least the wine is decent, he said to no one in particular. My heart sank. Fine. The word was a slap in the face. Evelyn took a tiny portion of mashed potatoes. A bit rustic, isn't it? She commented to Caroline, who nodded in agreement. I suppose it's what Daniel is used to now. The implication was clear. I had dragged their son down to my level. I tried to catch Daniel's eye, but he was busy trying to make conversation with his father about the stock market. He didn't seem to notice the subtle digs, the constant low-level criticism. Or maybe he just chose to ignore it, hoping it would go away. I pressed on, my smile feeling more and more like a mask. I talked about my work, about a small promotion I had recently received. Thomas looked at me with bored eyes. "That's nice, dear," he said, before immediately changing the subject back to his own business dealings. I felt invisible, like a ghost in my own home. The main course was a disaster of quiet insults and polite dismissals. But I still had one last hope: the apple pie. It was my best dish, the one thing that was truly mine, a legacy from my mother. I cleared the plates, my hands shaking slightly, and went to the kitchen. I sliced the pie carefully, placing a generous piece on each plate, adding a small scoop of vanilla ice cream. I brought it out, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. This was the love, the memory, the piece of me I was offering them. I set the plate in front of Evelyn. She looked down at it, her nose wrinkled slightly. She took a small bite with her fork, then set the fork down. She looked across the table, not at me, but at Daniel. Her voice was cold and sharp, a shard of glass. "Daniel, darling," she said, a cruel pity in her eyes. "This is why you should have married someone from our circle." The words hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't breathe. The air was sucked out of the room. Caroline let out a short, sharp laugh, quickly covering her mouth as if she'd been caught. Thomas just stared down at his plate, saying nothing. He didn't have to. His silence was his agreement. I looked at Daniel, my eyes pleading with him to say something, to do something. He looked shocked, his mouth half open. "Mom, that's not fair," he started to say. But the words were weak, lost in the crushing weight of her cruelty. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't let them see the tears that were burning behind my eyes. I stood up so quickly my chair scraped against the floor. "Excuse me," I choked out, and I fled to the kitchen, the sound of Caroline's stifled laughter following me like a curse. I leaned against the kitchen counter, my hands gripping the edge so hard my knuckles turned white. Humiliation washed over me in hot, sickening waves. I felt so stupid, so naive. I had actually believed that a roast chicken and an apple pie could change years of prejudice. I had put my heart on a platter for them and they had spit on it. Tears streamed down my face, silent and hot. I wanted to scream, to break something, to run out of the house and never come back. Through the closed door, I could hear their voices, muffled but tense. I couldn't make out the words at first, just the low rumble of Thomas's voice and the sharp, anxious tone of Evelyn's. I crept closer to the door, my breath caught in my throat. I just wanted to know what they were saying about me now. That's when I heard it. It was Thomas. His voice no longer calm and condescending, but filled with a raw panic I had never heard before. "The investment tanked completely," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We're ruined, Evelyn. We can't let anyone find out. If Daniel knows what I did with his trust fund, he'll never trust us again." My blood ran cold. Daniel's trust fund? What were they talking about? I pressed my ear flat against the wooden door. Then I heard Evelyn's voice, and it was a snake's hiss, cold and venomous. "Then our plan to push Rachel out must work," she whispered fiercely. "Daniel needs to remarry. He needs to marry a girl with money, or this family collapses. We have to convince him that she's holding him back, that she's not right for him. It's the only way." The air left my lungs. The tears stopped. A chilling clarity washed over me, so sharp and cold it burned. It was never about my cooking. It was never about my education or my job or my modest background. It was never about me at all. I was just a roadblock, a problem to be removed. They weren't just snobs. They were desperate criminals, willing to destroy my marriage and my life to save themselves. I had walked into my kitchen a heartbroken victim. But in that single, horrifying moment, something inside me changed. The hurt curdled into a hard, cold knot of anger. They thought I was weak. They were about to find out how wrong they were. I took a deep breath and wiped the tears from my face with the back of my hand. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the oven door. The woman staring back at me wasn't crying anymore. Her eyes were clear and steady, filled with a fire they had never seen before. I smoothed my dress, pushed the kitchen door open, and walked back to the dining room. The conversation stopped the moment I entered. 3 pairs of eyes swiveled to look at me. Daniel looked relieved and worried. His parents and sister looked annoyed, as if I were a commercial break interrupting their favorite show. Evelyn was the first to speak, her voice dripping with false concern. "Feeling better, dear?" she asked. When I didn't answer, she sneered. "Sensitive, aren't we?" I walked slowly to my chair and stood behind it, my hands resting on the back. I looked directly at Evelyn, my voice calm and even. "No," I said. "I'm not sensitive." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, enjoying the flicker of confusion in their eyes. Then I continued, keeping my gaze locked on them. "But I wonder, what would your friends at the country club say if they knew the truth?" Silence. A thick, heavy silence fell over the table. Evelyn's painted smile froze on her face. Thomas's hand, which had been reaching for his wine glass, stopped midair. Caroline's smug expression dissolved into one of bewilderment. They knew. They knew I wasn't talking about the apple pie. "What truth are you talking about, Rachel?" Evelyn asked, her voice tight. "The truth about the investments," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife. I watched Thomas's face go pale, a sickly gray color. "The truth about how you've lost everything. The truth about how you gambled away Daniel's trust fund." Daniel's head snapped up. "What? What trust fund?" he asked, looking from me to his father. I didn't take my eyes off Thomas and Evelyn. "And the truth," I added, my voice dropping a little lower, "about your plan. The plan to push me out so Daniel could remarry into a wealthy family. Because you're not just snobs. You're desperate. The dam broke." The room exploded. "What is she talking about?" Daniel yelled, his voice cracking with disbelief and rage. He stood up, knocking his chair back. He looked at his parents, his face a mask of betrayal. "Is this true?" Evelyn started sputtering, a string of frantic denials. "She's lying!" "She's hysterical. She's making it all up because her feelings were hurt." She waved her hand dismissively, but her eyes were wide with panic. She looked at her husband for support. "Thomas, tell him she's lying." But Thomas didn't say a word. He just sat there, frozen, his face ashen. He stared down at his plate, at the half-eaten slice of apple pie, a monument to my supposed failure. His silence was louder than any confession. It confirmed everything. Daniel looked at his father's defeated posture, and all the fight seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a deep, gut-wrenching pain. He understood. It was all true. I looked at the three of them, the crumbling matriarch, the silent, guilty patriarch, the confused, useless sister. They had tried to break me, to make me feel small and worthless. They had judged every part of my life, from the food I cooked to the love I gave their son. I delivered my final blow, not with anger, but with a quiet, powerful clarity. "You judged me for cooking with love," I said, my voice steady. "But at least I don't hide behind lies." Daniel turned his back on his family. He walked over to me and took my hand. His touch was firm, grounding. "We're leaving," he said, his voice choked with emotion but full of resolve. He didn't look at them again. He just looked at me. "We're leaving tonight." And together we walked out of the dining room, leaving the Bennetts sitting in the ruins of their own making, with nothing but a cold apple pie and the bitter taste of their own deceit. That night was the end of one life and the beginning of another. We packed a few bags and stayed in a hotel. We didn't talk much. We just held each other, the silence speaking volumes. The next day, Daniel made the phone calls. He confronted his father, who finally admitted to everything. He had made a series of reckless investments, losing not only the family fortune, but also the money Daniel's grandfather had left for him. Their plan to have him remarry for money was their pathetic, last-ditch attempt to save themselves. Months later, Rachel and Daniel have moved far away from the Bennett shadow. We found a small house in a town 1,000 miles away, a place where no one knew the Bennett name. It was a fresh start, a chance to build a life on our own terms. Daniel got a job with a new firm, and for the first time I saw him free from the weight of his family's expectations. He was lighter, happier. He was the man I had fallen in love with, not the son of Thomas and Evelyn Bennett. And me? I took the thing they had mocked and turned it into my strength. I started a small catering business from my new kitchen. I started with bake sales at the local farmers market, my mother's apple pie front and center. People loved it. They would tell me it tasted like home, like a happy memory. My business grew. Soon I was catering small parties, then weddings. My apple pie became my signature dish, the symbol of my new life. Customers loved not just the taste, but the story of resilience behind it. I had found my worth, not in the approval of others, but in my own hands, in the love I poured into my food. Daniel was my biggest supporter. He would help me pack orders, wash dishes, and tell anyone who would listen how proud he was of me. One evening, as we sat together, tired but happy after a long day of work, he took my hand. "You know," he said, a soft smile on his face, You didn't just impress them that night. You showed them who you really are. You showed me who you are. I often think about that night. It's funny how things turn out. They wanted me gone because they thought I wasn't wealthy enough, because I wasn't from their world. But in the end, they were the ones who were exposed, stripped bare by their own greed and lies. Their empire was built on a foundation of secrets, and it crumbled the moment the truth came out. We heard through a distant relative that they had to sell their mansion and that their reputation was destroyed. They became the very thing they feared most, ordinary. I don't hate them anymore. I don't feel anything for them at all. They are just ghosts from a past life. I found my own acceptance, not at their dinner table, but in my own kitchen, in my own business, in the life Daniel and I built together. I learned that true worth isn't about where you come from or how much money you have. It's about honesty, integrity, and the love you put out into the world. And sometimes, the simplest things, like an apple pie made from a mother's recipe, can be the most powerful weapon of all. If you've ever been judged unfairly by family, or by anyone, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of revenge, resilience, and truth.